Hello there. All right. So now is the best part of the meetup. All of us talking together. So here's what I'm going to give you 4 choices. You can either talk about music as a tool for comprehensivism, learning about the world, learning about yourself. How do you see music as a tool? That's one possibility. The second possibility, you can talk about anything that you noticed about Mike's presentation. Third possibility is that you can talk about any observation you have about the breakout rooms, anything that really stands out. And fourth, you can raise any question that you would like. Anybody who wants can put any one or multiple of these things on the table. I'm going to collect all of them and then look at the shape of what comes up, and then we will have a discussion. I will break it up into different topics, different questions, and we will have a discussion. So go ahead and type exclamation mark. You have 4 choices. Joe, could you do me a favor and put that in chat? The choice number 1 is music as a tool for personal growth. That's number 1. Number 2 is any observations on Mike's presentation. Number 3, any observations on your experience in the breakout rooms. And number 4, any questions. You can do any combination of these. Go ahead and type exclamation mark. Let's see what we put on the table. And based on that, we can go ahead and explore what comes up. We'll start with Allison. Allison, go ahead.
So this probably wasn't what we were supposed to talk about, but we are talking about what music we listen to when we're in the last hour of a long road trip to keep us awake. And Jeff even played his music for us. So I wanted to know, what music do you need to listen to when you've been driving a long time, that last hour?
Okay, I'm going to generalize the question about music you listen to in various situations. So we
could talk about the emotional things that go with it.
Wonderful. So we'll put that as an excellent question. Thank you. Next up, folks, if you want to do deal with multiple things, you're welcome to do that, and you can come back and add more things. Jang, followed by Hugo. Jang.
Yeah, my question is can music evoke same or similar emotion to everybody? Same music evokes similar emotion to everyone around the world, no matter their culture, whatever background.
Wonderful. Does music produce the same emotion? Folks, these questions are looking very good. So I might turn the dial in favor of questions. So let's do short comments and then questions if you can. Hugo, followed by Becky. But if you want to comment, you're welcome to do that too. Go ahead, Hugo.
Yeah, thanks, Srikat, and enjoyed the presentation. Great job, Mike. Always a pleasure to hear you sharing your personal experience and your thoughts. I have a question that popped up in my head during the breakout room. So one of the attendees mentioned that that the universe, it was pretty much like a gong rather than a big bang. So my question is, did culture invent music, or was it all along within nature and we just discovered it? That's my question.
Wonderful. Thank you. So is music in nature, or is it a cultural invention? Wonderful. Next up is Becky, followed by Judy. Becky.
One of the comments made in the observation room was about music and the use of it in healing. So that was very interesting. Davi had mentioned that. So that would be one of the topics. And Mike, it was great. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Music and healing. Excellent. Judy.
I'd like to know what music you would like to have in your funeral.
Funeral?
Yes.
That's quite macabre. You know, there is music
Well,
for healing, music.
I
for
thought of
driving.
mine. A lot of people play wonderful music in people's funerals. I've been to several of them,
Wonderful.
and I know which one I want. But
Okay. Wonderful. I will ask. All right. So we got there. Any more questions? Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, in honor of our poetry meetings on Monday, I was thinking, if you take poetry and take the words and use them as lyrics to a song and put music to it, does it change the meaning of the words to the listener?
Wonderful. How does setting poetry to music change the meaning? Very good. I'm also going to put your question about how do we learn, you know, what is the process of somebody whistling in tune? Okay. Next up is Joe, Paul, and Evanik. I am so delighted with all these questions on music. Joe, go ahead.
Fantastic presentation, Mike. If I guess my question would be, why do some people feel more comfortable expressing their emotions through music rather than words?
Wonderful. Comfortable expressing through music. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next up is Paul, Evanik, and Chang. Paul.
Oh, thanks, Srikat. Love it all, of course. Rather than ask the almost too broad question of what is music, I will ask this. If you go in the woods and you hear a few birds singing at the same time, and they make you happy, are you hearing music? It's a similar question to the nature question.
Wonderful. Do birds produce music? And I will put what is music too. If we can get to it, we'll get to it. Next up is Evanik, followed by Chang. Evanik.
my question is about the imposter syndrome. And my question is, does the imposter syndrome make you step up your game because other people see you greater than you see yourself?
Wonderful. What is the impact of imposter syndrome? Does it step up game? Wonderful. Next up is Chang. Chang.
Yeah, my question is, because I took my son to this vocal class, and the teacher said he listened to the song, he can sing it. He said it's not everybody have the skill. And I was wondering, like like you can draw what you see, not everybody can do it. So I wonder, is this a born talent or is a learned skill?
Wonderful. Is music part of nature or nurture? Excellent. All right, Becky, go ahead.
What draws you to a certain instrument? And then the second question would be, what draws you to a certain genre of music?
Wonderful. To instrument and draws you to a certain genre. Wonderful. All right, folks, this is going to be fun. All right, so let's see where to start. I always like to start with the broadest questions. So let me just recount the questions and then we'll come up with it. There's a questions about music for different occasions, and I'm going to keep them all together. At the end of a drive, for healing, and for funeral. Okay, I'm going to club them together. Next question was about music and emotion. Does the same music produce the same emotion in people, across individuals, across cultures, or is it different? Next question is music in nature or culture? Okay, so this one, nature and culture, is a very broad question. Let's see where else it shows up here. We got birds producing music. What is music? Is it a result of nature or nurture? Okay, so let's start with that as a starting point. Is music part of nature, or is it part of culture? Is it something that we are, is it something there outside of human beings? Is it there before human beings? When we experience music, is it something that we just have in the beginning when we are born? Is it something that is learned? So any thoughts about it? Folks, try to keep your answers brief so that we can go through all these questions. These are just amazing questions. So is music part of nature or culture? I don't know that I'm asking this question right. You're welcome to say, okay, no, this is the right way to ask this question. We'll start with Evanik, followed by Becky. Evanik.
I'm going to say both, but I'm going to say more culture for 2022. I think, everybody that's born nowadays is raised with the music that their parents are listening to. It becomes a part of their family. You hear music at family functions. It becomes a part of, it's like a soundtrack of your life. And depending on the family or the culture that you're born in, that's the music that you listen to, and that's the one that has the emotion. Now, when you go out into the world and you meet other people, you also gather from their culture and their music, and you incorporate it into your own and you bring it back. But I think it's nature, because I think it comes from nature. Like wind, if you think of the wind and the rain, it's a very musical thing. Like for some people, rain is very peaceful, or wind and rain is very peaceful, and it's almost melodic. And if you listen to some musical pieces, it's based off of nature, and even some musical instruments, like wind instruments, are based off the nature of wind. So I think it's both, but I think more today we would say cultural.
Wonderful, excellent point. So there is a base in nature, there is a base in culture, and then there is an individual too, that each individual can start off with the natural base, the cultural base, and then they'd have their own individual kind of taste and the direction in which they go. Next up, Becky. And Becky, what do you think?
I think that it's innate. It's definitely in nature. Like cyclical, we see the cycles happening over and over in nature. We pick that up automatically. And there's certain things like the sound of thunder that invokes a feeling within us, right? And we can even consider like a cry of an infant a form of music. It's very much dissonant, right? But it's what we have as individuals, as also, we see it with the animals, with the birds that sing. And over time, when we're interacting with each other, we bring our individual music, and we learn to dance with each other. And as a few people from the breakout room mentioned, it's like figuring out what's going on. And now, instead of individual instruments, you're forming a community to make a symphony. How are you going to develop? And you see this with groups, new groups. Over time, they learn to really mesh with each other, and sometimes they don't. They break apart. But it's that over time experience of a culture that then you have your different genres of music, your jazz, your bluegrass, and all that. So It's only both, but it's honing over time and with your group.
Wonderful, beautifully put. So what you're saying is that the nature, the music is there in nature to start with, but then we actually interact with that music as a group, as a culture, and we, through honing, through actual practice, actually listening and dancing and singing and actually exercising it in our brain, we build these patterns and patterns and patterns over interaction. So that part is nurture, which is based on nature. And then on the top of that, there is individual kind of choices of somebody who spends a lot of time doing music, who goes out of their way to look at the range of music out there, maybe experiment on their own of something new that they've come up with and work on it to build that. So there's this kind of combination of at the base being nurture, then there is kind of the social base, and then there is the individual on the top of that. And so when you're looking at musicality of a particular person, you have all of those three layers operative at the same time. Wonderful. Next up is Joe, Davey, and Paul. Joe.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to try and build a little bit on what has already been said because it's mostly been covered, I think, for the most part. But yes, I think you captured it well, the idea that it's in nature and then that there's a social element and then there's an individual element. But I would say the shaping can be, it's interesting because music is used as a form of a language for certain cultures and how it actually shapes as their only form of communication in certain cases. So mostly in Aboriginal cultures that we've covered here in the past, how they use it as a form of communication is also a different way that a culture can shape actually music itself as just a form of actually how to interact with one another, just on the most basic of levels, not a more emotional or social level, just more of a actual fundamental transactional level.
Wonderful, wonderful. So if we interpret music broadly as communication, because even when we are speaking, we are using tones. There is a certain kind of serenity to some people's sound, kind of a little bit of anxiety in some people's sound. So the emotions come through as you're speaking, what meaning that carries. Like you can see that very clearly in poetry, that there is a flow to it. So there is the musicality, the sound itself carries a lot of information. And that's that's a great point. So there is a larger phenomena of what sound does for us in nature and in community and at individual level, of which music is kind of most developed form of using the sound, a systematic way of, or more kind of virtuoso way of using that. But excellent point. Next up is Davey, followed by Paul. Davey.
Yes. Comment on your comment, if I may comment.
Please.
The great philosopher, Spanish philosopher, Santayana, he said that 80% of communication is in gesture and in tone, not in words, but in our mannerisms. That's what brings it across. But that's just a footnote. It's been said that music is the language of the soul. I forget who said that, but I like it. We're talking about nature as compared to culture as a derivation of music. If I'm going to make an error, I can't separate the two, nature and culture. I really can't separate them in my mind at this point in time. I would choose nature because I divide music into two separate camps. there's the melodic camp, which would be our Western music. And then there's the tonal music, which I would identify as that of the East and the Far East. Two different types of music that produce two different types of results. The Western tonal music, I see it as very fundamental. Basically, all of that music, for example, all of the raga music is going to be based on C sharp. C sharp is known as, some people know it as Om. And so all of the great ragas are written in C sharp, and you master that. That's the first note you learn in class is Om, is C sharp. And why is that significant? It's significant for many reasons. There was mention of healing. I'd like to address that now.
We will come to healing later. We'll come to this. So we'll have multiple ways of going through it. We'll have about 20 different questions, and we can keep adding more things at the other question.
Then I'll leave my comment as I see a division between tonal music and melodic music, between Eastern music and Western music, and they will differentiate according to culture and nature. But I like to lean toward nature. I like nature. And culture's fine, but culture's on both sides. It's East and it's West.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. I'm familiar with Indian music and Western music, and I don't understand the distinction you're making right now, but we'll come to that later on when we discuss kind of different kinds of music. Next up is Paul. Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, briefly, I think my comment could just be a starting point to the things, especially Becky said and Joe said, which is I would make a minor modification to the music in nature is not with the philosophical rigor that I would like, because all we really have in nature are frequencies, is sound, our frequencies, vibrations. And I think just as the famous quote, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, music is in the ear of the beholder. And everything that Becky and Joe said describes that. So I'll leave it at that.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Paul. All right. Let's take a question related to that. Does same music produce same kind of emotion in people? Is that true across individuals within the same culture? Is it true of individuals from different culture? So music and emotion, is there a one-to-one correspondence? And if the answer is more complex, what is the complexity? Go ahead and type exclamation mark if you'd like to answer that. All right, no answers? Okay, it'll remain as a question. It's fine to have questions, keep questions. All right, let's take the wicked question, because I can't resist it. Go ahead and restate your wicked question, Mike, for us about whistling.
Well, when I was kind of refreshing my memory and learning a lot of new things about the wind instruments, you start to learn how airflow is cut, and mechanically, like, I understand the physics behind whistling. What I don't understand is how somebody is able to whistle in key. So
Wonderful.
Is it neuroscience? What is it that is?
That's fine. Just a question. How is it that people are able to whistle in key? Clearly people can whistle in key. So how is it that people can do that? Go ahead. If you'd like to answer the question, go ahead and type exclamation mark. Becky.
This is coming from ignorance, so let me just caveat it with that. Okay, but I would say that the left brain, when it's so good at details, being technical, being intentional, that what you were talking about, pursing your lips and focusing on so many little things, but then the ability to just naturally do it, I would say is probably on the right side of the brain. The more of that intuition, that feel that you're talking about. So that's it.
Okay, wonderful. Next up is going to be Jennifer, Angelo, and Paul. Jennifer, how do people whistle in tune, or how do people sing in tune? It's the same issue.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm a classical musician. I'm a vocalist and a French horn player. And, it's exactly the same instrument, whether or not you're singing or you're still, if you're singing, you're playing French horn or you're whistling, you are using your muscles, you're fine tuning the muscles of your body, be it your larynx or your lips, to produce a sound that is congruent with your current perception of pitch. So yeah, it's it is what it is, I guess. It's how do we do that? Well, we just do. We hear it, we get our muscles to respond to it, and I don't think it's necessarily a unique thing to whistling, but it's any kind of music that requires your body as the instrument.
Wonderful, wonderful. Let's see. I'm really curious to see all the answers. Next up is going to be Angelo, followed by Paul. Angelo.
All right. It's part of the language. How do we learn to speak? I tried learning Chinese, and it has the tones. You do it. Millions of people speak Chinese, no problem. And it's just part of language. Whistling is part of language. The Canary Islands is a form of communication. Whistling is a form of communication. They whistle. That's it. It's where they speak. Over distances, and that's the answer there. And I have a question for Jennifer. Since she's a French horn player, why don't you play with your right hand?
Okay, wonderful. So we'll put that as a question. We'll look at handedness and left brain and right brain and music.
Nothing to do with that.
Anyway,
oops.
Next up is going to be Paul. Angelo, what we do is that we kind of do it in a very systematic way. So we're doing only one question at a time, and then we will come to the next set of questions so that everybody kind of focuses on just this one question of how do you actually sing in tune? Paul, how do you do it?
Well, one observation and one just things to help the discussion. One is a note that it seems miraculous. I do agree with you, Mike, but note that birds do it. Very complex songs with specific pitches between them. They're brilliant at it. And secondly, the instrument I view as most interesting to think about here is the slide whistle. Have you ever done one? And all you're doing then is having your mouth be the same sound cavity as a sound whistle produces and modifying it. So it's sort of an easier analogy, at least for me, to imagine how our brilliant brains can do it, and then to imagine that birds can do that also. Incredible. Yeah, okay.
Wonderful. So my answer is it's about feedback and resonance. See, what happens is that we are actually incredibly sensitive to resonance, and our ability to actually hear the notes. So what you are actually doing when you're perfecting it is that you're hearing yourself and it's producing a resonance. To give you examples, so for example, like when in Indian classical music, what they would do is that they would use a tone like this. Can you hear the tone?
Yeah.
So when I'm singing, I can very easily tell, is this right or is this wrong? And this is called the tonic note. So even if it is slightly off, my ability to tell that is very high. So another way of simply doing that to improve is you have to hear yourself. So you can do this. So you can use the vibrations in your own head to hear yourself, or you can put your hand in front of your mouth and hear what you're whistling or what you're singing. That feedback is the thing, because what happens is, to give you a dramatic example of it is, this was, I don't know who it was, maybe it was Galileo. He was trying to measure, he was trying to measure, I don't remember what it was exactly, but he was trying to measure something, and he actually found that hearing, so for example, this is, let me give you the perception. What you're asking is about pitch, but the same applies to rhythm, for example. So for example, when Galileo was trying to measure gravity, he was trying to accurately figure out what is the rate at which something comes, falls, right? So firstly, he's a brilliant guy. So look at the simplicity of the experiment, okay? So he says, okay, things fall very fast, so it's impossible to tell, how fast they are falling. He doesn't have a clock, okay? He doesn't have an accurate clock. So what is he going to do? So first he did this. He compared different movements to his pulse and used that as a base. He used that when, he was watching pendulums. Pendulums are much slower. Gravity is much faster. So what does he do? He does an inclined plane, and he rolls things on the inclined plane, very long inclined planes. So because it is over that much distance, he's able to observe things better, but still he doesn't have the time measuring instruments to do that. You know what he does next? He starts to put little bumps on the inclined plane. And what happens is that our ability to actually hear a regular rhythm is much, much better than any other perception that we have. So he adjusts those little bumps to find out the rate at which the ball going down the inclined plane is accelerating. So he used the musical ability, his musical ability that everybody has of rhythm, in order to figure out the rate at which things fall. So he figured out gravity using music. So that's the ability, but it's a question of feedback, I would say. Maxine, what do you think? Or what do you know? Yeah, you will know the answer to this. Go ahead.
All right. I have to dispute you on something.
Please, and anytime.
Okay. There are a lot of singers that put their hand in front of their face or put their ear, that you shouldn't do that, because when you do that, you'll be singing flat. There are two ways. If you have perfect pitch, you're born that way. But otherwise, you have to train yourself for the pitches. And if you keep your breath control, if you have your hand in front of your face, you rely on that and you don't use your breath control. And it's your breath control that controls the pitches. So what else?
No, that's a great point. That's a great point. This point.
You have to start when a kid is born and you teach them. In other words, you want the kid to like classical music, start playing it in the womb. If you're playing hip hop, your child is not going to all of a sudden, when they're 10 years old, enjoy classical music. I ran into this with one of my grandchildren. They play garbage all day. And then I said, I couldn't stand it already. I said, Siri, put on Mozart. And the kid said, oh, that's adult music. No, it's not. You have to train yourself to do it. You have to be very careful with that, because most singers are singing flat, and you have to train yourself not to sing flat.
Wonderful. Excellent point, Maxine. So I will say two things. So first point that Maxine is making is that, again, this is a question of the iterative loop. Okay, you have to really listen to a lot of music. You have to sing a lot of music in order to develop musicality. Okay, and it's the loop. You start it in your womb. You started when you were young. I grew up listening. I was very fortunate. I grew up in the literary household. Some of the top musicians in India, the absolute top, used to come and stay at our home, and they would do their riyaz or practice. They would riyaz, do this riyaz like many hours a day. They would be practicing. And that's what Indian musicians do. They typically practice for like 10 hours a day. That's a normal day. And so what happens is that when you do that, all these layers and layers of patterns build in your brain, and they actually speak to you when you are singing. They actually resonate, and they produce all kinds of levels. So your ability to tell whether you are off pitch or not keeps growing up. And Maxine is right. I was giving the external examples as a crutch. If you want, you can start that way, but ultimately it moves in, and you actually hear yourself. You don't need an external thing anymore. And Maxine is right. It's breath which is actually producing the sound. So the higher level of control is to move it inward, where you can feel it yourself, and to build it into your body itself. So when you're singing, that note is clean, and there is a full breath control behind it. So it will produce the note that you want to produce, and your brain will automatically give you feedback that it is the right note. Excellent point, Maxine. Beautiful. Next up is Paul, Zheng, and Jennifer. Paul.
I'm sorry. I think I already said I've spoken. I didn't.
Okay. Sorry. Zheng, Jennifer, and Jeff. All J's.
Yeah, I just heard you mention somebody mentioned about the breathing and the heart, and it just remind me, music is there's two, one is melody, the other is about the rhythm. And the reason I think is so closely related to our heart rate and our breathing is all about, I wonder if that's the reason is related to our emotion. We were talking about most people like music are feelers, and it's very emotional, it's connect to our emotions so strongly. Maybe that's the reason, because we said breathing is the only way we can control our emotion actually through the breathing. And another thing is about vibration, how vibration of the music that physically, like can maybe vibrate our brain in some way. That's also create some kind of emotion.
I'm going to turn that into a question, and we will take that next. Is the question between emotion and music. I'll formulate it better, and then we'll ask that question. I really want to see what people think about music and how it generates the emotions. How does that actually happen? Next up is Jennifer, followed by Jeff. Jennifer.
Sorry, I took a while to unmute here. I'm on my phone. I'm going to switch over to my computer soon. So the question of intonation and how to sing in tune. I'm wondering, does anybody know anything about the particular sine waves? I mean, I think as I think about this question more, so is singing in tune really a question of making sure that the actually acoustic waves you're producing are compatible with each other, and it is kind of training yourself to make sure that the sine waves you're producing are in agreement with those that the rest of the group is producing. And growing up, especially playing French horn, I sat with a tuner. I still sit with a tuner, and I make sure that needle is absolutely solid on the pitch that I want to produce. And then the question, I didn't get to answer the first question on nature versus nurture, but I thought I'd bring it up because Srikat had mentioned it. I grew up in a house that listened largely to like Southern gospel music. And something in me resonated so much with classical music. None of my family are classical musicians, but there was something in me that gravitated towards classical music. And I look back at myself as a child and I'm like, where did I come from? Because it wasn't my parents' music at all. And I say music, but it's also, I also see music as a language. I'm a trained linguist, and maybe we're going to get into that later, but I'd also like to speak about music as a language if we get to that question later. Thank you.
Wonderful. We'll definitely get to that question. Next up is going to be Jeff.
So it is interesting to consider the music we grew up with. From my mother played, at least she tells me, played classical music constantly for me before I was born. And while we would go to see performances in classical music, both my parents were major jazz fans. And so all forms of jazz, especially piano jazz, as I was growing up, were just all around me. And I do enjoy going to jazz clubs in New York. But so when I started playing movement music, social movement music, and and folk music when I was a young man, my parents were just, oh, come on, give me a break. We raised you on classical music and jazz, and here you are singing these folk singing songs, But even though I haven't listened to that much classical music as an adult, when I go to a performance, and it's one that I know that my mother would have played for me as an infant, I do remember it. And it's a fascinating thing to just instinctively go back there. So who knows what influence all this might have on us.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. Next up is Becky.
I thought that what Jennifer brought up was interesting. Yeah, so with like waves, if we actually think about the frequency, they form different waves. And so when you're looking at, when you hear things that are dissonant or a little off, a little flat, a little sharp, there's a misalignment with those waves. And what sounds good to us is when things are aligned well with those different like intervals of those pitches. So it really does make sense. And so when you're just a little bit off, well, that little bit of alignment, it's like, well, now you're causing some cancellation somewhere. And it's just like, it's not like you feel it like, so.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's mostly kind of tones. So the thing is, and anything which is like a whole interval. So if you're playing the same note, it resonates perfectly with each other. If it is double the frequency, it resonates really well. If it is like 1.5 times, that's like the, that also sounds very clear, bright, cheerful, serene tone. But if it is little off, then the ratio, it's a question of ratio between the two tones. If it is little off, then it is very, very jarring, because I think it's mostly kind of ratios that we are responding to. And if that ratio is a very complex ratio, the experience is jarring. Whereas if it's a simple ratio, like 1:2, 3:2, then it is a very clear kind of experience. Next up is Allison.
I was thinking about what Jeff said. I had a similar thing. My parents were really, really interested in jazz, but they never played classical music in my house at all growing up. but I really got really interested in it through ballet. But I remember at a certain point when I was like maybe about 17, 18, because I had that music from ballet that I loved, that I felt like was much better than all the popular music, but the popular music was what I listened to with my friends. And I remember saying, like, feeling like this disconnect, because I knew that musically classical music is better, but I said, but why do I feel this need for this? And I remember somebody saying, it's okay, stop beating yourself up. Like, you need different music for different things. And like, when I was younger, I was really, really interested in like in punk music and new wave music. And I would go to these like, I used to hang out a lot in CBGBs. I loved CBGBs. And it felt like this disconnect from this like very serious world that I was going to, and then this other world that I really needed. But then it kind of like continued on. And like to this day, I'll like I listen to all this indie music now that none of my friends listen to. And then I try to get them to like come with me to go hear a band, and like that's not so easy to drag them into that. But I feel like you need different music for different things, and that's okay. And I think, but one thing that we talked about in the breakout room is that a lot of people stay stuck on whatever music they listened to when they were adolescents. And I don't do that. Like I mean, once in a while I'll listen to some music from like when I was a teenager, but generally I don't. But I like finding new music for each era. And I think it's kind of strange that a lot of people don't. And I don't know why that is, what that connection is, but.
Yeah, it's fantastic points, Allison. I mean, it basically, I think like music is connected with social context. So for example, way Jeff was talking about it, way you're talking about it, it's like, it's kind of integral part of social context, like different social contexts, different cultures, different subcultures have different music associated with it, because it kind of captures their emotions, their leitmotif, their style of consciousness. And for me, kind of listening to different music is experiencing kind of different cultures, different consciousnesses, different ways of being. And what happens is that many people, what happens is that they are not that adventurous, they are not that curious about life as such. And it is very comfortable to stay with something that you're familiar with, that you grew up with, because that it has a level of comfort associated with it, which exploring something new does not have. It will not produce the immediate impact. It might require, it's like, that's kind of odd. And then it kind of grows on you, but you have to be willing to be open to that. So I think that's the reason why many people go with that. Next up is Jennifer, Angelo, and Jen. Jennifer.
Sorry, I got like a million things I want to say, and like people are making points and I'm like, I want to talk about that. So very quickly. So there's a difference between intonation and dissonance. So when we're talking about intonation, that is the trueness of the pitch to the established like center of that pitch. So you can be in tune, but you can be singing a note that it clashes with another note, and that's okay. But if you're singing a note that's supposed to clash with another note and those notes aren't in tune, that is not okay. So you can be singing an A against a B to create a dissonance or a suspension, and then it pushes to resolve to an interval that feels more happy to our ears. But if that A and that B are not in tune, it's going to sound like crap. So there's a difference between dissonance, two pitches up against each other, versus intonation, which is the trueness of those pitches to the established norm for that pitch. Like in the case of A, some groups tune to A440, some groups tune to A442. If everybody in that group is not tuned to A440 and you have one person that's tuned to A442, it's going to sound off. You have to be in tune. And if you're in tune, even your dissonances are going to sound better. So that's one point. And then, okay, so music as ways of being. I totally agree with that. And as I've gotten older and developed, when I was in college, I discovered Ladysmith Black Mambazo, which sung backup for Paul Simon's Graceland album. And then like now I'm into this, like, I don't know, like I went to Montreal to hear a concert. It was Corsican men's a cappella group. They do traditional polyphony. They're fantastic. And they were accompanied by a group called Constantinople, which has obviously lots of Eastern influences. And it was just like, I just feel like music opens up the world. Like you can take a trip to another culture. It's like speaking another language. And I often describe like learning another language and speaking another language. It's a different way of being. It's a different way of using your brain and thinking about the world. Here I go into the linguistic versus music thing, but I think they are like flip sides of the same coin. Okay, I'll stop rambling now. Thank you.
Becky, I think I missed you. Did I?
You didn't, but Jennifer brought up that distinction, and thank you so much. That was really good. But I do want to pose a question.
Sure.
Because I'm a lot of things are like flashing off, and like, you know, my aha moments.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I want to take a just throw it out there. Perhaps cognitive functions are reasons for certain people's preferences in music,
Mm-hmm.
As well as the breath. So I wanted to throw that out and perhaps opine on that if you choose to get to that question.
Wonderful. We'll put that in this one. So we have like emotion in music, we have language in music, and we'll go ahead and put this in as well. Angelo followed by Cheng. Angelo. Angelo,
all right. Okay, this is kind of following Jennifer's thing about tuning. Some groups actually detune choral groups, gospel music. People detune, and what detuning does is it just a fraction off. It fattens the sound. The people who do synthesizer stuff, you can fatten. You can have 4 people sounding like 8 people, or as a bigger group. It's just a fatter sound. When you do unison and you do perfect unison, you lose people because it's the same unison sound. It just gets absorbed. Whereas if you open it up a little bit, it fills out. So
wonderful, beautifully put. Beautifully put, folks. For people who are not familiar with music, the points that Angelo is making and Jennifer are making are very, very interesting. See, what it is that there is a lot of complex things happening in music. What is happening is that there is a note. Okay, so like when people think of note, people think of this sine wave. Okay, it's actually not a sine wave. You know, we have a timbre, and it's actually a very kind of complex wave, which does have a frequency. So there is like a base frequency. What Angela is saying is that just a slight amount of variation around that actually makes the sound, I like the term fatter, in the sense that it is more richer. It's like more, but at the same time, it's going together. It's not like going in all over the place. It's going together. The other point is that, Jennifer is talking about dissonances. See, once you have the notes right, the notes tuned up, actually music, the experience of kind of opening up a dissonance and then closing it up, that's a fantastic experience musically, because you're saying, and like it's like telling a joke. It's like it's a little bit of surprise, and it's all controlled and it's all choreographed. So that's what it is. Next up is Paul, followed by Mike. Mike, you have started this amazing conversation. I can't believe it. Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, on this, another note on this pitch thing. When you tune a guitar, you have a tuner and tune it. My friend turned me on to this spectral tuner that's highly precise. where you can see when you strike a note that is correctly tuned with a little tuning peg, the pitch will quaver above and below it, and then sort of settle. And also note the human vibrato that is actually quavering above and below the note. And some people can tolerate it more than others. And I, for instance, I think it's a loss of the digital age when you create your digital symphony with your software. Everybody's perfect. We like the differential. I don't want to, and I love the singing of Billie Holiday, even at the end of her life. She was not hitting the notes very well. I mean, and yet her emotion was so deep. So you have to combine the whole effect and not just go, it has to be right here. And I love the way Jennifer talked about our goal being that. But yet, one more quick story. The Radiohead guy, I think I mentioned and that was in the breakout room. He does composing for scores now, and he tried to have a group with one of the violinists at 442 and one at 440 or something like that. And you know why it failed? Because that violinist is so expert, he subconsciously bent his finger a little bit and adjusted it to the rest of the people accidentally. It's all very fascinating. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. And that's the feedback, it's really powerful.
Yeah.
Like a great musician has that, like they instinctively will do that. Next up is Mike.
Yeah, wow, what a great discussion to listen to this. Really fantastic. So I wanted to talk about time as opposed to pitch, and but before going there, I'm always fascinated by instruments or musicians that can bend notes. So a guitar player can bend a note, a blues harmonica player can bend a note, and when they get really good at it, they take the audience to the point. It's like, God damn it, get to the note already. And they're just building and pressing the note. And sometimes they don't take you there. They take you almost there. And it's actually dissonant, right?
Mike,
but they're doing it on purpose.
Mike, I have to tell you, Indian music is all about pitch bending. It's like Western music is digital. You go from one note to an, in Indian music, you never go from one note.
Right.
It's all bending. It's all it's all curves, and you have to get the curves right. Go ahead.
But it creates real beauty, I think. But anyway, I also wanted to talk about time from the drumming perspective, because Angelo used the word fat. And I think Jennifer brought up the Graceland album by, was it Paul Simon, I think? And I think Steve Gadd was playing drums during that time. And Steve Gadd was known as a really fat drummer. And what that means in drumming parlance is the groove is so rich and so solid. But a lot of these fat drummers, if you had a strict metronome, they're slightly behind the beat, where you're waiting for him to hit his snare drum, which is supposed to be keeping time, let's say in 4/4, and that snare drum is going to come down on the 2 note, and it just hasn't come yet. And the drummer that I had referenced earlier, Dave Weckl, who's phenomenally sometimes ahead of the beat, where he's doing some of these embellishments, and you say there isn't enough time for you to get this done. So I always liked musicians who can bend the pitch and also waver the time and still keep the band moving. I always found that fascinating.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, thank you. Now, I mean that's really the heart of it, because what happens is that, as I think Paul was saying, digital, computers can produce quote unquote perfect music, but it doesn't really speak to you, because the thing is that what our brain has a certain complexity. So it needs to have the complexity and have it resolved, and do that at so many different levels, in time, in pitch, in sequence, in kind of a large pattern and a small pattern within it, and all of those things. And a person who is a virtuoso is able to do that, actually. And that's what it means. And as Maxine was saying, you get that by just taking in music. Like I love Ella Fitzgerald. So one of her terms is that she says, I stole everything. I stole all music. So it's like anything she hears is hers. You know, she just takes it in, and not just passively. It's like she can actually, there is this one video of hers showing what would a song look like in different genres. And she would just change from like country music to ragtime to this. And she would do better country music than country music while showing how it can be done. And she goes on like that, gospel, everything. Next up is Jennifer.
So, okay, so lots of exciting things to talk about. So the question of timing and just playing behind the beat or ahead of the beat in certain classical settings, like you want to be ahead of the beat. You don't want to be right on the beat. I played under Riccardo Muti and Jay Friedman, who's the principal trombone with the CSO. And there are pieces where, yeah, you want to be ahead of the beat, and they're going to push you to do that. And then when you play like Vienna waltzes, for example, you want there just to be a little bit of lag, so you get that bump, 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 that feeling. And then I wrote a piece actually for ETS in Princeton. It's educational testing service in Princeton for non-native speakers of English to test their comprehension ability. And the piece was about digital music, because there, I think, what was it? I can't exactly remember, but there's all these programs out there that now that produce music. And the larger philosophical question is this music? Is there meaning there? And it's the same question of like, digital art. Is there meaning there? Is this meaning because it is digital? And when you take the human element out of it, and every note is perfectly in tune and every beat is perfectly in tune, and there isn't that element of surprise, and that I love playing under Riccardo Muti, because that man can do more with his pinky finger to tell you about how Verdi should sound than, he just moves a little bit, and the whole orchestra responds in a way that's just, this is just such an emotional experience for me. I can't even describe it. But what are we doing to, when we auto tune and when we use digital instruments or digital means to get everybody in the same rhythm? Well, no, we're bastardizing, we're sanitizing it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I feel very strongly about live music performed by live musicians. That is an art form. It is live art.
Beautiful.
I'll stop pontificating now.
Thank you. You're pontificating very well. Thank you. Next up is Allison.
Jennifer, what you said about with the music, when you get there like a shade early or shade later, dancers do the same thing. And it's so interesting because it creates like a feeling of legato. Like if you're in the adagio part of the dance, it's like a little trick you play. You get there just a hair after the music, and it just keeps going and and the same thing for the like with your jumps, you want to get to each jump just before the music, and it increases that effect. It's fun. It's interesting to see that.
Wonderful. Folks, next question is about language and music. So let's make it as broad. There's a question of poetry. We're doing on Mondays, folks, we do poetry where everybody comes and reads their favorite poems. There are many people who actually write poems, so they read their own poems, and then we discuss what poetry can do for us. So don't miss Mondays. It's turning out to be something really special. So what is the relationship between poetry and music? What about lyrics of music make them perfect for the music and music for the lyrics? What kind of musicality is there in language itself? Now I'm speaking, but there is tone and there is all kinds of stuff happening when we speak in the oral delivery itself. So what what do you make of this, and what observations do you have? We'll start with Evanique, followed by Jennifer. Evanique.
Yeah, I think with musicality and poetry and lyrics, I think one thing is an artist tries to evoke an emotion, right? When they're composing music or when they're writing lyrics or, when they're writing poetry, they're trying to convey an emotion. And usually it's something that they're going through or, like whether it's a happy time or a sad time. And really, it's cathartic to them. Like a true artist, not somebody who's like just trying to be popular, but a true artist, they're putting themselves in it. So they have this idea and they're putting it out. And at first it's just raw. And then like the musicality may come from the words for certain people. It depends on the way they work too and way their brain works. From some people, they write lyrics and then the musicality comes in with it. It's like a rhythm to it. Some people, they hear a beat and then there's lyrics that comes to that too, or they hear a musical score. Like, we were talking about in our breakout room, that, there's a lot of songs that get sampled or get used to. And the reason I think for that is because you hear music and it just brings up an emotion in you, right? And I think it has to do with the sound waves. And somebody was saying earlier in the discussion, like it has to do with the heartbeat of it. And I think all that comes out in their music. And so with that question, I think it's an emotion that is trying to be conveyed in language, in rather in poetry. Even poetry has, even though there is no music, there is a musicality to it because they're trying to invoke an emotion. I think emotion inherently is very musical, even like anger, sadness. You see it in all genres of music. Anger, sadness, emotion is kind of musical, and that's why certain songs hit at certain times, and they convey different emotions. And I think that's because emotion is music, and then you just like the artist puts it together, and that's what makes it great, no matter what the genre or form is.
Wonderful. I like your use of the concept emotion, because that's like a middle term here of, because you're producing the emotion with music and emotion are so intimately connected. And poetry too, you're trying to produce emotion. And so I'll broaden it, the question, what is the relationship between language, poetry, music, and emotion? So you can deal with any of these. Go ahead and type exclamation mark if you'd like to share. We'll go with Jennifer, followed by Marco. Jennifer.
Okay, so yeah, Srikat, you're speaking of music related to language and music related to poetry. I'd like to pull that back a little further and, as I said before, say that music is a language. Music is a form of communication. And a number of you, you probably heard my story about being involved in the car accident, suffering the brain injury. I had been unable to play my horn and I had been unable to sing. And there's part of my soul that can't speak if I'm unable to do music. Like it's just as real to me as spoken speech. And then Ebony, to your point about, people who get up there and put their heart and soul into things, I am just in awe of Amy Winehouse. And every time she got on that stage, her heart, she was raw. She was raw and reliving things. And you wonder why she ended up where she ended up. It's because of that raw emotion that is so much a part of musical expression and poetic expression. And then as I think about the musical experiences I've had and I hear pieces on the radio, there's when I'm sitting in an orchestra playing or when I'm singing with a choir, there is a musical and emotional soundscape that I am part of for that piece. It's like an actor getting into character. You become the music. You are the music. You are putting your heart and your soul and your emotion into expressing these little scribbles that Beethoven did, you know, hundreds of years ago on a piece of paper, right? So that hits me so deeply because it's my soul speaking. It is the rawest part of me speaking. The issue, the Ukraine has just been weighing heavily on me. And when things like that happen, Leonard Bernstein has a quote, something to the extent of, and this will be our response to violence. We will make music more passionately, more intensely than ever before. And that is what I posted on my Facebook page is it's music. Today I heard the violin theme from Schindler's List playing. I mean, you've got a cultural context for it, but that fit, that was something that spoke to me in that moment. And then also tying into the poetry, you know, the poem that came to mind was W.B. Yeats's The Second Coming. That's what, you know, that's what this whole threat of World War III and nuclear war, that's the part of my soul that's kind of spoke through that poem. So I think it's very complicated and it's a close relationship and it's deeply emotional for me. And it's been part of my life and part of that expression. If I was having a bad day at school, I would just come home and like take it out on the piano, just getting that emotion out, very cathartic. So yeah, there's that music as a language rather than music related to language.
Jennifer, that's just amazing. And I'm going to pick up on that. I'm going to go to Marco and Paul, and then we're going to discuss music as a language. Okay. Next up is Marco, followed by Paul. Marco.
Yeah, I sort of read somewhere, but I'm not totally sure that like poetry sort of has the music included, you know, in the poetry, you know, with like meter. And so it's like, you know, with lyrics, you sort of need the music along with the words. So that's
Wonderful. Thank you, Paul, Marco. Next up, absolutely. I mean, the meter, it has all kinds of things like rhymes and meters in order to capture some musicality. Next up is Paul.
Yeah, I think for those of us who were in the Monday poetry thing, when we started talking about this, the music element gives yet another chance for the person who's bringing the poetry forward to put themselves into it in a new way, because we talk about this as showing your true self through poetry, but now you have yet another vehicle. And I talked about Eva Cassidy a little bit. Can I play 30 seconds of a different song? Because another point I want to make, Srikat, is it's especially effective when you already know the poem, and even you might know it as a song, and then someone brings it forward and makes it their own, and you just fall in love with everything at once. And this is Eva Cassidy doing a little piece of Over the Rainbow.
Please.
Just to give you that example. I can't breathe after that, but you see what I mean. Wow. And I don't have to say anything else.
Yes. Wonderful, Paul. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. That was just amazing. So I want to focus on this last question now, and I want to take whatever time is needed to do that, because you know, music as a language. What happens is that most people, when they look at art, they look at it as a consumer, and that's not a fundamental way of looking at art. You have to look at art as a producer, and then you can understand what the art does. You can actually appreciate the art better. And that is very deep point, because what it, like, for example, I'll talk about the experience I have, which is from the Indian classical music. So the way in which the person who is a singer approaches it, that is their life. That is their life. That is their expression. That is, that is who they are. It is like their identity. It is how they breathe. It is, they don't know anything else there isn't anything else that they would rather do. And they spend their entire life, typically from childhood, building up this language and learning to speak in it. They have very high standards of what constitutes speech. They listen to people who speak to them, whom they can see are speaking. Most people can't speak. By their standards, most people can't speak. Because at this level, speaking means, capturing something. The way in which it is seen in the Indian context, it is a spiritual quest. You're trying to reach, you're trying to speak from the deepest part of you to the, you're speaking, your Atma speaking to Brahma. That is what it is. Like you're speaking from the core of your being to the universe itself. And that's what you're trying to do. And you're trying to capture in all these various rags the entire manifestation of the grandeur of existence, of everything that is there in the world, everything, all the emotions, all the range, all the ups and downs, the delicacy, the complexity, the combination, the variation, movement from one kind of emotion to the other. You're trying to express that in your music. And that's what music is to these folks. And it is not entertainment. I mean, in the Indian context, traditional Indian context, the singer would sing with their back to the audience because he would be singing to God. It is between him and God. If there are people listening at the back, that's fine. They can listen. It doesn't mind them, but it's not for them that he's singing. It is just between him and God. It's the deepest expression of what they're capable of. And even the greatest of these folks have a level of humility. Actually, greater the person, the deeper the humility that they have. They're saying, oh, I am trying to explore Bhoop. Bhoop is a very simple rag. It's just 5 notes. It's the Chinese scale. It's a very simple, but it is beautiful. It is sonorous. And they spend their entire life. So at the age of 80, for one of the topmost musicians, Bhimsen Joshi, he would say, I'm getting old now. I can sing only 7 hours a day. There was a time where I could sing like 17 hours a day. Now I can sing only 6 hours a day. And I am beginning to understand this rock. Okay. And he has the best things, just most mind-blowing things possible. But the other point of it is that it is a performance. It is a live performance. You're trying to live that. Now, music is not about, oh, I did that time. The question is, can you live it now? That is the standard of great art. And that's how I think about music as a language. So any comments on this? Go ahead and type exclamation mark about music as a language. We'll start with Angelo, followed by Jennifer. Angelo.
Yeah, about the Indian communication and all that. I saw years ago at a concert, there was Zakir Hussain, who plays tabla, for those of you who don't know. And there was a Khatid, I'm not sure what they call it, a Khatid dancer.
Kathak.
Okay, Kathak. And they were in the same group. And the way I'm used to jazz, people trading fours, the drummer plays something and then the musician plays, and I'm used to that kind of thing. But what they were doing was interesting because the dancer would say, he would say the syllables, and then you know, and then so he's saying the notes. That's the way it works. And Zakir would play it on his tabla, and he would do that, and then he would do a little extra, and the dancer would pick that up. And I don't know if you people know that the kind of dancing. It's sort of like almost like tap dancing, but different. And he would play the same. He would dance the same notes that he did, and then do something more. Like, oh, try this one now, and this and that. And it went back and forth. It was fascinating. Much more complex than some of the drummers I heard, including Dave Weckl.
No, absolutely. The Indian tradition of rhythm is very, very complex.
I know.
And the other thing is that the description that you're giving, it's a beautiful description, Angelo, by the way. See, what happens is that, you know, people are actually speaking to each other. You know, we were talking about music as a language, right? You're speaking your best part, and you're speaking partly to God and partly to the God within this other person that you're playing with. Okay, you say your best piece and the other person responds. They are going to, in their own medium, like tabla, drums is different than a body of a dancer, but they are trying to do in the body, in the tabla, what the person did in dance. And then the dancer turns around, and not just that, but he's adding, say, hey, and by the way, hear this, and they will add something to it. The other person takes that, reflects that back, captures that, shows him that he understands fully what he's doing and where he's going, and then goes a couple of steps on his own in direction which the other person did not expect. And you go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And there is a level of respect that is there for the other person. All of these people are at that level, and they are speaking to one another. They're learning from one another. They are exploring new areas together. And because they're separate people who are both focused on their own individual grasping of what is possible and really open-hearted in listening to what the other person is saying, together they can produce something which is far more grander than what either of them could actually produce. So this is called Jugalbandi. So there's like two people working together. Thank you. Next up is Jennifer, Mike, and Marco. Jennifer.
So I've got about a million things to say here. So Angelo, thank you so much for making the distinction. You said that the drummer plays and then the musician starts playing. So there's that, you're making, somebody when I was in college, when I was in the conservatory in college, somebody made a comment about the musicians and vocalists on the stage. So Angelo has, he's eliminated the drummers from the musician. Anyway, it's just a funny musician joke. But, as you were talking, Srikat, I was thinking about African talking drums, which actually sort of mimic the tones of speech, and they can send messages over large distances through that. And then this fascinating music style you were describing as a conversation between two people who were essentially improvising. I think about tying this into language. I think about improv acting, where you do a yes and to your partner. You are in dialogue with this person, and you've got to be able to take what they give you, make sense of it, and then hand it back to them. And the same thing happens. I so miss the days of being in the conservatory. And when I was in high school, there was a group of folks I used to get together with during study halls, and sometimes we'd even skip class. but we would do jam sessions. And I so miss that. And I love doing harmonization. Like just somebody sings the melody line and then either I pick up the tenor line above it or the alto line below it or whatever. And that conversation, that just improvisatory nature where I am communicating along with somebody else who is in sync with me, it's just phenomenal. And it's not a scripted communication. It is, we are doing this thing together and we are having one heck of a time talking about whatever it is. I also think about this Japanese musician. I can't remember his name anymore, but he had his electrodes put on his body, and his body movements then operate a piano. So he's playing the piano with his body. It's wild. So just kind of like flipping that on its head, where the body is the instrument as opposed to the body manipulating, or the instrument anyway being played by the body. In thinking about you were mentioning being a musician as an identity. That is so true. Like I said, with that car accident and being unable to perform or even play, that just tore at the core of my being. And this happened a couple of years ago when I was in college. I had a lip injury and I couldn't play my horn, but I ended up joining the choir because I had to. It's not something that I can do or that I want to do. It's something that I must do. And I play horn as an amateur, but at some point in time, I had decided in my life that I wanted to play my horn for love and not money, because playing my horn and making music for money, I would have felt like I was prostituting it. It's something that I love too deeply. Yeah, if I get paid for it, great. But give me the music and let me play a Beethoven symphony, or let me play, an opera. The idea of music and language, and music being a language. I was in rehearsal one time and I forget what, I was talking to the second chair horn player next to me, and he indicated something on the music, and I'm like, but I already said that. I didn't say I already played that. I said I already said that. And it came out of me so spontaneously, like I already said that. And then I thought, oh, yeah. And then my final thing is that I talked about emotion and musicality and just it being such a deep part. There have been performances where I just cried in performance. One of the first ones was we did Copeland's The Promise of Living from the Tenderland, and it's about agrarian communities and bringing in the harvest and farming, and my grandparents were in the audience. And this to me was just a huge part of my heart that I was giving to them. I don't know if they understood that, but to me, that was a form of communication to them because they were hardworking farmers. Another one was playing Mahler's Second Symphony in Orchestra Hall. I played with the Oak Park Symphony. And the end of it was just, there were all of these voices and all of these instruments and all of us together doing this beautiful thing. And I just remember holding out my last note and and I was crying because it was just such an intense emotional experience. And then with the brain injury, my first concert after that, I was singing backup in a choir for Andrea Bocelli at Allstate Arena. Mm-hmm. And the concert was about hope. And the concert was about beauty. And it was just, it was overwhelming because I was finally able to do this thing that meant, so it like all came together, the music and Bocelli being a star and me recovering from my brain injury. It all just all came together like those, what's the saying that life is not so much about the, what is it? It's moments that take your breath away. Life is more about the, I can't remember. Does anybody know what I'm trying to say?
We can put it in the chat once.
Okay.
But
I'll see if I can find it. I'll let somebody else talk now. Thank
you. Thank you, Jennifer. I have to tell you about one thing in New York, which is really amazing, and that is musical improv. There is a theater called Magnet Theater, and before COVID, they used to have this show where the entire night there would be like 6 different troupes. each of them doing musical improv. And musical improv is just, you just walk in there, the audience gives you an idea, and you start composing music. You start doing poetry plus music together, and you're doing this with each other and with the group. They just it's just most amazing things. And talking of improv, next up is Mike.
So I wanted to just respond about music being a language. I've thought of that a lot. One is that it can be given without being translated. So it kind of has a universality about it. You don't have to speak the same language, the literal language. I can just play music without it being translated. But I look more to the kids, to children, because children acquire language in a unique way. They have this knack to manipulate the individual sounds in the language, and they're just not being taught to speak, right? They're just acquiring language. And the video that I showed, the young man playing the French horn, I mean, he was a really young person that was in front of that orchestra, right? And so at what age did he pick up that instrument? And in my world, in the chess world, the young children become extremely proficient. And I think what the commonality is, it's the manipulation of individual units. The chess players, the kids are just manipulating individual moves, and they're chunking them as they're doing with sound, right? An individual sound becomes a word and becomes a sentence and a paragraph. And what is the musician doing? They're kind of manipulating the notes on the staff as a mathematician, because there are young people who have been prodigies in math as well, right? Very young people who come up with some amazing theorems, for example. Well, what's the commonality in all this? I think they're all language-based. The musician is manipulating the staff. The mathematician is manipulating the number line. The chess players, let's say, is just manipulating individual moves. So I think if you look to young people, that might be a clue that music is a true language.
Thank you, Mike. I think of it slightly differently. I think like the music is largely kind of a right brain operation, and you have it's like a combination. It's like you have like a whole, you're keeping a whole in mind, like where is this whole thing going? And that you're always keeping in mind, and any particular thing is in the realm, is related to that. So it's not like you're taking this individual things and it will add up at some point. You already know. It's like Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. It's like, it takes off with those 4 notes and you know where it is going. And it's like, so it's like a throw, and you have a conception of this entire arc and where you are in that arc. So it's a kind of integration of those. Next up is going to be Marco, followed by Evanique. Marco.
Yeah, nothing really new from what was already said. But I was in a jam band a few years ago for a little bit, and yeah, just that communication and that call and response between voice and other instruments, and this sort of communication without language, and this sort of this connecting to each other without using words, and yeah, it just became like a unit basically. And so that's it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Marco. Next up is Evanique.
Yeah, something Mike said about language and music and children. I was thinking of, shows that we used to grow up with, like Sesame Street and Reading Rainbow and all those things. And all of those things, they had a musical component, right? And if you think about it, kids are watching these at toddler stage before they can form words. They are listening to these programs, right? They are listening to Sesame Street. And that's how they learn the language. They learn the language, and it makes them dance, and it makes them feel joy, and it creates a love of learning in them, and it sparks creativity and all of those things. And I think when you look at it at that base level, before they learn language, they learn music. And that music helps them learn language, and it's through the joy of learning that they learn it. And so, even as adolescents and adults, like, we learn about emotions through music. Listening to music on the radio, you don't know why it evokes this emotion in you at age 12, or why you want to dance, or why you may feel sad when you feel a certain, but music has that, like, non-language, I don't want to, I think I want to say non-digital, but I'm not sure, but that non-digital component where you don't need words. Like, you don't need words, and that actually music is used to teach kids words, and teach kids sentences, and teach kids stories, and teach them even how to read and how to write. And I'll say this last point is that in a lot of schools, they have learned that sometimes, like, the regular teaching method doesn't work, but teaching through music helps kids achieve more. So it's just that language that helps, and I think because it connects to them emotionally in their young life, and it just helps them to learn the language more.
Wonderful. Thank you, Evanique. Next up is Jennifer. Jennifer, go ahead.
So riffing on what Evanique just said, and yes, I'm making a pun there. I've noticed, and I've heard studies done about the persistence of music in memory. So Alzheimer's patients who can remember songs that they can communicate through, so they can sing, they can still remember the lyrics. And my grandmother died of dementia in 2019, and she could still remember. She could not remember who was in the room with her. She couldn't remember that my grandfather had passed, but she could remember those songs that she had learned when she was a kid. And I just find that amazing. There's something that music just seems to hardwire itself into your brain. And then when let's see. So when I was in middle school, we learned a song with the states of the United States in alphabetical order. I can still sing that song to you, recite all the states, but I can't do it without having the song in my head. Like, I have to be thinking about the tune of the song to remember the lyrics, to remember the states. And then this just shows you what a big nerd I am. But so my friend Shayna and I were working on memorizing the polyatomic ions for our chemistry class. So we made up a song to the tune of New York, New York to help us remember the charges of the polyatomic ions. But it was tapping into that ability of music to help you lock things in. It gives you, I think it's like a two-pronged way of remembering both the language and then the musicality topped on top of that.
Absolutely. The largest example of that is the way in which it is used. It has been used in India. For example, in India, they remember the Vedas, just like there are, Dvivedi and Trivedi and Chaturvedi. That means how many Vedas do you remember? Like Rig Veda, when you pile it up, it's about this thick, like these many books together. And like knowing one Veda means you actually can recite the whole thing. And the only way to do that is with sounds, is with being able to chant it with a certain intonation. And that's how, that's the mechanism that is used. And sound is very deep in the Indian culture. We are finding that out in our Bhagavad Gita meetups. So that's something which is a very, very deep topic. Next up is Joe, followed by Evanique. Joe, you have not spoken much. Go ahead.
It's been such a joy to listen to everyone that I'm just literally taking it in. I mean, everybody's comments have been fantastic. I loved, Jennifer's, Angela's, everybody's, Evanique's. It's really been a fabulous discussion. And I'm just kind of this is one of the ones where I'm really actually interested in what Jennifer was saying about the idea of digital and how everything is perfect and what the impact digital will have on music. That's something to think about. That's one of my major takeaways, is just the perfections that come with digital, but there's no spontaneity or any kind of real
no, sorry to interrupt, but I can't resist this.
Please.
This is the same point that Walter Ong makes, that all text is pretext because it is missing the context. So even if you get the right notes down, if you can get the digital things down, it's the entire context around it that makes it great music. So you remove that context, even if you have the spine there, you don't have it. You just don't have the whole thing. You don't have the whole richness. Go ahead.
That's really interesting, because now I'm starting to even see this is why it's good to just keep talking, because I'm starting to see exactly what you and Mark are trying to bring back with Scribble in that regard.
Exactly.
I mean, because
that's exactly what we are doing, right? That's exactly what we're doing in this meetups, right? When we are studying Bhagavad Gita, Gospel of John, we're taking the text and we are discussing it with each other. Each person is bringing their entire rich context to bear on understanding, or in the beginning was the word.
Right.
What does that mean? And bring, all the commentary, like Aquinas commentary, bring all of that in and just pay attention and try to put a picture together of the full richness. And all of these texts that we are studying, whether it is Tao Te Ching, Bhagavad Gita, or Gospel of John, are deep enough. They are actually speaking to you at so many different levels. And we have gotten used to actually reading books at a very low level.
Right.
We are reading them sequentially, and we are just communing with whatever it is that comes in our head. And we are taking away whatever it is that we take away, which is mostly what was there in the head in the first place.
Right.
Okay. It's mostly kind of confirmation bias
I was just about to say
that you're using. What this is doing is that what our conversations are doing is that they are actually taking this as a theme. And the important thing is that in the scribal age, the time when these books were written and studied, that was the approach that was done, whether in the peripatetic school of Aristotle, when all these students are going around reading the thing, talking to each other, Aquinas in university, or the Gurukuls in India, or a Zen master talking to his students. Exactly that. Zen master, you just read the koans, you will get only 5% maybe of what is being done. But it's the master and the interaction with the student is the other 95%. So without that entire rich context, that text is meaningless. And that's what we are considering as the only thing. Go ahead.
As the basis of what you're bringing back and retrieving. It's amazing how these things connect. When we have our conversation, it was just a simple comment that Jennifer was explaining, the difference between digital music and music that is done by a live artist or an NFT, as well as you were talking about with digital
See, the
art.
other point that Jennifer also made was about the live, the sacredness of the live.
Right.
Okay. It is the consciousness.
Right.
It is all about. Go ahead, Jennifer. Sorry,
interject
you have a million things to say. Go ahead.
Yes. And I don't have a forum for talking about them because I'm not in the conservatory anymore and I miss my conservatory people. But no,
Jennifer, this is your conservatory.
Excellent. No, so tagging on to what you were saying about live art, and the digital thing. If you want to see me really mad, video record a classical concert or video record in an opera house, or bring your cell phone in and neglect to turn it off and it rings in the middle of the performance. Nothing makes me angrier than that. That makes me so mad. There was actually a guy who was recording a performance of Rigoletto at the Lyric Opera in Chicago. And I headed out, talked to the house manager, like there's this dude recording, tell him to shut that thing off. This is live art. Put that damn thing down. I don't want to see the light. He doesn't have a right to do this. There's also, this is quite amusing, that bit about digital versus live. So have you seen the video of, there's a performance going on stage, somebody's Nokia ringtone goes off. The performers on stage pick up that ringtone
Yes.
and start improvising on it. I love that.
I saw
Love
Branford
it.
Marcellus do that, actually.
Oh yeah, really?
Yeah,
Really?
yeah.
Oh, I sold a trumpet to Ryan Kaiser, who plays with the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra.
Wow.
Anyway, okay, I'm done now.
I have one
Go
thing I
ahead,
wanted
Phil.
to add really quickly, though, getting back to this idea of music and language and how it reaches us, you know, in a way that and it builds off what Jennifer was talking about, that words can't necessarily. You know, same thing happened to me. My mom was my grandmother was essentially, you know, was completely out of it, lost all her faculties, wouldn't know who you were, anything. But if you played the hymns of, you know, the high mass or something like that, she reacted. And in a way, I could even, my friend, they said, you know, he was dying of cancer. And I've worked a lot with dying people in general, even in all different types of situations, actually in India. And it was, but the one thing that really does make a difference is playing music, right? My one friend, they said he was non-responsive, and but I played classical music next to him. Some composers that he hated, just to get him to try and react, and he would close his eyes, and it still reaches them. And it's such a touching thing, because it's, you know, they're in there, but they just can't get out, but you can reach them, you know, and music does that. And it's always been amazing to me that to see how music, and this is all across, I mean, every person that I've been close to, that, you know, in their final moments, that's what really still, when they're non-responsive, so, you know, the nurses say that they're non-responsive, they still have their eyes blink or whatever it is, in that moment, music still reaches them. So anyway, it's remarkable. It's remarkable how music, and that's something that I continue to think about, as to how, what it does that words you know, doesn't achieve, you know, it is on that I'm not able to achieve with words, what music's able to do. Maybe sometimes people are listening and I just don't get the reaction. I don't know, but.
That's wonderfully put, Joe. The thing is that, like, in the Indian classical music has a very large tradition. So many people doing this over, you know, thousands of years, and it is very powerful. So, like, for example, you know, it's like when I start singing, it doesn't matter what state I was in, like within fraction of a second, the mood is completely changed. And you can choose a rag to completely transform your psyche and to kind of reorient, recenter yourself. No matter what is going on, you can recenter yourself within seconds or milliseconds, something like that. It's incredibly powerful. And I always think of it as a tool to be used. You know, it's like, that's who you are, and you kind of express, you use it in order to pursue your goals. You know, why should you feel angry about things for a long period of time? You know, or anything, you know, you can choose to kind of reset. So I use it for reset. It's very effective. Next up is Evanique, followed by Angelo. Evanique.
Yeah, just speaking to that. My one friend, she's been my friend since college. Her mother passed, right? And she was with her mom, and her dad was in a healthcare facility. They both have dementia. And at the moment of her death, her husband had asked the Alexa, the music, you know Alexa, right, to play their wedding song at the moment.
Wow.
And so when she went to tell him, you know, Marie passed, that's her mom, he said, what time? And she was like 12:30. He was like, oh, that's the exact time I played our wedding song. And I think that music may either like transcend life itself. And I never would have thought of that until this meetup. That it just spoke to me that at that moment that she was passing, that he thought to play that song. And I think, you know, and one thing about Jamie's mom, like Joe was saying, is that her mom was nonverbal for a while, but she could evoke emotion through a song, and they would sing together. And I just think that's the beauty of the music, is that it has this ability to just transcend and just to bring comfort and peace in the most tragic moments of life. I think that's what it speaks to. And I don't know if it transcends life, but it just felt like in that moment, that's what it did. Like she was passing and he was listening to their wedding song. And it was just like heartbreakingly beautiful in those moments. So I think that's what music does.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Evanique. Next up is Angelo.
Thought you do this. Okay. Yeah, I would like to take a little bit of issue with Jennifer about digital versus acoustic. One of the instruments I play is a wind synthesizer. And I also play saxophone, trumpet, blah, blah, blah. But it's getting scarier and scarier. One of the things I miss about playing those other instruments, the saxophone, let's say, is the vibrations, that you actually feel the instrument vibrating. I used to play early on, I played upright bass. So that whole thing is like to your body, and it looks like a lady, you know, so you feel this whole sensual thing when you're playing it, you know, it's very close. And now I got an electric bass, which is just a slab of wood with some electronics on it, you know, and it doesn't vibrate. It's very little, and it's kind of boring. But with the synthesizer, there are some people are working on getting sounds that sound just like an acoustic instrument. Now, if they can get it to vibrate, sometimes they actually put a little motor, a little thing in the instrument, because it's basically just metal and electronics. So they put this little thing in there that vibrates. It's not a note, it's just the instrument vibrates. It's not the same thing, but we're getting there. And the sounds they're getting now, indistinguishable from an acoustic instrument. And you have to realize most of the music you hear is recorded. So you're not actually hearing live music. You know, if you go turn on the radio, you're hearing a recording. And so it kind of comes down, it's not real. Yeah, so it's a recording. So
wonderful. Thank you, Angelo. Next up is Jennifer.
So I'd like to take issue with some of the things that Angelo just said. But I'd also like to agree with some of the things that Angelo just said, and those being that, well, so what was preventing me from playing horn and from singing was the vibrations, because I had this little tiny bone in my upper cervical spine that was out of place, and that was creating problems with the brainstem. And those vibrations were, it was somehow messing up the communication system in my body. So those vibrations that are produced by singing and by playing, I couldn't tolerate them. I loved the analogy of the upright bass, you know, being like a woman, and you know, it's a very sensual thing, because I have the same feelings about my horn. Now that you said that, you know, the horn, you know, it kind of wraps around and you play it with it, and it's just kind of this embrace of that thing that is so much a part of me. But it's a very sensual, very tactile thing. And yeah, those vibrations, feeling my lips making those vibrations and just being able to experience that. And your comment about, yes, music being recorded. I get that. I'm not listening to live musicians in my living room playing, the Schumann piano concerto, unfortunately. But there is still that live. It was an initial live performance. So if it's a completely digitized performance where you've got everything like auto-tuned and you're using, a synthesized drum track in the background, there you lose the elements of the humanity of the music as I see it. So that I'm taking issue with some of Angelo's points and agreeing with others.
Wonderful. Wonderful. All right, folks, we were supposed to run this meetup only up to 11 o'clock, but this conversation has been amazing, And Jennifer, special thanks to you. Really, really love your comments.
Thank you so much for listening and for appreciating them.
No. Seriously, because it's very simple. It's an attitude of somebody who is a creator, who's an artist, and who cares about their own art. And that's it. It's like, that's how, all the artists I've known, or anybody who really takes pride in their work and just really loves it. That's how they talk about their work. So it is very much, and music is very close to my heart. So I really, really enjoyed all your comments, really appreciate it. And Mike, look what you did. You made a presentation and you got all these people talking about all these amazing things. What do you have to say for yourself?
Well, I'll finish with this. The word that I kept hearing floating around, even though we came from so many different angles for music, was the word emotion. And I think it was Maya Angelou who said that I learned that people will forget what you did and they will forget what you said, but they will never forget the way you made them feel. And that's pretty profound, because I think music, when you're on the receiving end of it, I'm just watching Jennifer's emotion when she's talking about music, and people are bringing back memories and different genres and dances that they did. To me, it was just one big dance with emotion tonight. It was wonderful listening to all of you. Thank you so much. It was great.
Well, thank you, Mike. These meetups of yours are doing so well, and you somehow managed to get everybody excited about sharing things at this level. So this is fantastic. Thank you. We'll see you soon. Folks, we've got incredible meetups. Don't miss any of them. They're amazing. We're doing meetups on Gita, and that is something else. It's like, I'm not religious, but it's been just an amazing experience. Those are on Thursdays and Fridays. And we're doing an in-person meetup. We're trying out an in-person meetup on Saturday. So if you're in New York area, see
what time?
Want to do it at 5:30. And there is a small chance that we might need to